Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Tech Leaders Unplugged. Today, we're going to get unplugged with Melissa Daley, the president and founder of Orca Intelligence. And our topic is going to be AI empowered thinkers. And so, we get a lot of media around ChatGPT and all these things that help us where the AI is doing all the thinking. Well, this is really about, how the human is being assisted by AI, and they're still driving the overall flow of the work, and it's just enablement of the person instead of the AI driving the solution. So thank you so much, Melissa, for joining us today and sharing your experience and your thoughts in this area with our community. And yeah, let's quickly just give yourself a little quick introduction to yourself, a little bit about Orca Intelligence, and then we'll jump into the topic.
Sure, not a problem. Thank you so much for having me, and thanks everyone for joining. I appreciate the opportunity to be with you all and share on experiences from my professional experience and being the founder and owner of Orca Intelligence. Just to kind of give you a background about where I've started in all this, I have about, I don't know, 20 something years, 20 plus years in IT, specifically 90% of that is in software development, specifically digital transformation, whether it's systems integration or custom solution. And what got me here is it's really interesting because I had my first internship. Yes, I'm dating myself. It's a long time ago. It was like when it was Windows 3.1 and Lotus Notes, and so from IBM. And during that first internship, I was told that, computers are going to be the wave of the future. You should, try to look at being in some type of computer field. And I was like, okay. At first I've always just wanted to have my own business and so forth. So I was going to college in order to be a business major. And because of that internship, I changed it. I changed it to computer information systems. And I didn't know how good I was at being an engineer until I, um, I would say not until maybe even recently, but when I changed my major, it gave me both the business side and the computer side. So I was able to do both. And I've always wanted to be an entrepreneur. I've come from a line of entrepreneurs and so forth. And so this was an opportunity to look at an industry and say, okay, so how is this industry going to change within the next 20 years? And where can I put my foot in it? Right. So that's me. It's being a 20 something year old saying, I need to find the opportunity within this industry. That's really what got me to the Orca Intelligence, right? Like I've had a couple of businesses before this, but in order to really try to identify how I could be a player in the market, specifically this market, I had to think far ahead. So Orca Intelligence has been a vision for a very long time. And the vision of Orca Intelligence has always been to be a boutique artificial intelligence organization, right? Like that has always been the vision before, your generative AI and all of that, right? Like officially, Orca Intelligence did start in 2014, but there were plenty of other steps prior to 2014 of the foundation for Orca Intelligence. And one of those things was working for organizations like Accenture and Booz Allen and ICF and some other, nonprofits and other commercial organizations, working for those organizations and switching between those organizations and finding out they were asking me to do the same things over and over again. And specifically, one of those things as a systems engineer or systems analyst at the time was to create requirements for software that were similar in nature, right? So when I say I didn't know that I was good at engineering, my engineering brain had to find patterns, right? So I was finding patterns in the documentation that I would either have to architect or write or design. And I would find those patterns through different projects I was on. So I would be able to leave a job and then basically take those transferable skills and go to another job and do the same exact thing based off of what I did at another place. And I was like, okay, wow, these people want to pay me a lot of money to do the same thing. This is excellent. Okay, great. Right. So I was like, well, I can make a business out of this. Right. Like, why isn't there a briefcase per se that I can take to every single project that I'm on and reuse this information in order to design some type of software? And so I was able to recognize that early on, but then I couldn't figure out, how do I develop this? Like, how do I, create this type of solution? And for years, I'll tell you, for years. So when I had the idea, probably about maybe 8 to 10 years before I started Orca Intelligence, and I had the idea, I gave up on it. I was like, I don't think I should do it. There's no way. I don't have the time. I want to get married. I want kids, blah, 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 blah. I don't think it should be me. Right. And then I said, I still want to, start a business. I still want to do my business and so forth. I started a nonprofit years ago, and a for-profit organization. They both kind of did the same things to a certain extent. And then I merged them into Orca Intelligence after dissolving those businesses probably about 5 years prior. Again, I still have the itch to try to figure out, how can you streamline the information? How can I streamline the requirements management process, the requirements elicitation process, so that whenever I'm on these projects, I can just press a button and I don't have to be asked to do these things over and over again. The one thing that I don't like is to repeat myself, right? Like, I don't think anybody likes to do that, especially when you're an engineer. You're just like, I solved this problem. Why do I have to solve it again? Give me another problem to solve, right? So that's generally the impetus to why I like to structure requirements that way, is because I think requirements should have a framework, just like software. Like, software has a framework for you to pull from. If you're in, GitHub, and you need or any type of, like LAMP framework, or whatever type of framework that you want to design, whatever type of framework you want to design your system in, there's a framework for software developers. There's a framework for testers. There's all these different frameworks. But the one thing that there was a generally small sphere of frameworks for requirements. And so I built the framework, which is PAM. So we'll talk about that. So the Plan, Analyze, Manage framework. And so with that framework, I was able to create a repeatable process. And then I did it in Excel first, and I did it in Access, Microsoft Access, and so forth, when I was working for different companies. But I didn't do it to the level of detail that I really, really wanted it. And then that's when I basically jumped. I just quit my job and was like, okay, well, we'll find somebody's going to hire me to do some independent work. And then that's how Orca Intelligence started. And then from there, I was able to really kind of push myself and try to determine whether or not I needed to hire someone to develop what is now called Swiftly. So this automated tool, this AI, natural language processing tool that was created by me to generate requirements in less than 3 minutes, right? And so I didn't want to create that tool. Again, it goes back to, I have this idea. I don't really want to do it, but it's a great idea, I think. And so essentially, I hired other people to try to develop it. And as we all know, if you're not really good at managing the requirements and managing your developers, your scope and your budget is going to take a really big hit. And so that's kind of what happened initially. I had developers that were not as determined and tenacious as I was in order to develop the solution. And so essentially, I'm going to say this, that, for those of you who have lost anyone during COVID, my sincere condolences. But I would say for someone like myself, who is a high level introvert, COVID was the best thing that could ever happen to me. Absolutely best thing. Because that is when I had the opportunity to build out swiftly myself all the algorithms, collect all the data, generate the data, do a lot of like it's like elementary data science, but it's still enough for us to develop requirements, and I mean pretty detailed requirements in 3 minutes, right? So you put the information in there, you're able to generate these requirements, and you're able to at least have almost like a punch list of what you need to have a conversation about. So it kind of templatizes it. It's not going to be exact for the solution, but at least it gives you enough information for you to have a conversation for your release planning meetings, your sprint planning meetings, be able to prioritize. It automatically prioritizes what the first one should be for you to implement. You can switch those around, of course, but then it gives you a foundation for you to think like a systems engineer, to think like a business analyst, to think like a systems analyst, like the steps in which you need to take before you actually hand that over to a developer and say, yes, this is what you need to develop. So it gives you that type of brain trust and framework in order to speed up your requirements process. So now, anytime anyone asks me to do something, or anyone on our team asks us to do something twice, we've already done it. So we press a button and we give it back to you, right? And it regenerates it. Sometimes they'll use it based off of historical information, but for the most part, it's regenerating it for a new project. But we do have the framework and the algorithms in there that I created all through COVID. And there you have it.
So it's interesting that you tackled the requirement side, because I go back to the government days. I worked in the defense industry where we had just piles and piles of very heavy narrative requirements. Of course, the waterfall days, right?
Mm-hmm.
And requirements were king back then, because you didn't get started until that requirements document was done. But that might take 6 months before we even write the first line of code.
Correct.
And then agile comes along, and almost requirements get tossed out the door, right? Everything goes,
which is not what agile says, but yes.
Yes. And so the user stories became more and more vague, less and less formalized, less and less structured. And requirements has kind of taken a back seat. And we all know that if you don't plan right, you're not going to build, what is in the mind of the people, the expectations. And a lot of times they can't even articulate what they want. They just know it when they see it, right? How many times have you heard that? Yeah. So expediting the requirements, and of course where the AI is coming in, is helping to, I've wrote full business plans in a day, that would have normally taken me weeks with generative AI. And I imagine prompting this stuff into these requirements, you can build a good, shell of requirement set that's still very well written and informative, that can then take those and go into the user stories if you still want to use those agile modes. So
we do. That's what we generate. We generate your user stories.
Great. And so it fits right into the agile methodologies, but it is at least thought of comprehensively, and completely based on historical. And then now, of course, with these object-oriented kind of programming, ChatGPT generated software, if they then can tie off that, user story, you could really fast track stuff even with low code, no code now. So
correct.
That was the missing piece, was that requirements was not well captured. So you really, really jumped on a big gap in the marketplace for software development. So as you were developing this, you said, COVID gave you that gap to think about things and really spend time, focus time, that the distractions that typically are in life were kind of quieted at that period. How did you do it based on mainly your experience that built the product roadmap and the feature sets, or did you go out to talk to others that have this problem and say, hey, this is what I'm thinking, and get some feedback before you could act? Because it was hard to get face to face with folks, so you had to have done it virtual during that period. Tell me a little bit about your style.
So it was a little bit of both, right? So I took a master's program at the University of Maryland in order to validate this problem, right? And my thesis was basically, yes, this is a problem. If we could have predictive analysis for projects, it would be great, right? And so I said, okay, great. So at least I know that I validated this with specific project manager, systems engineers, systems analysts, and whatever. But when I validated that information, that was in 2015. Fast forward, COVID hit in 2020. So we're here 5 years later, and no one else has built this tool. And again, I was in the mindset of, I don't think it should be me. And I was like, well, maybe it should be. So I built the tool with the intent that I would ask other people that are in my, universe of people that I can ask that are in the industry. And I did a prototype. Like I did a crowdfunding campaign, I believe, through I Fund Women. And I asked for people's feedback. I showed them the raw version of Swiftly at that time. At the time, it was named something else, and no one liked the name, so I switched the name. And everyone loved the name Swiftly. So it was a lot of rapid prototyping. I know this is going to sound backwards in terms of the reason why I created Swiftly, but because I was the only person on the team creating Swiftly, essentially, I wrote my requirements on my window, right? And so my requirements, my backlog was on my window in my home. And so I would just wake up and just build the next feature and keep building and keep building. And I would wake up in the middle of the night and I would obsess about it and keep building and think about all the different patterns to put in place and how this connected to sustainability and like just a bunch of things in terms of the way that my mind processes. And I did constantly ask for feedback and, had interns and did the, at least some a little bit usability testing. And a lot of people didn't like the first version. They didn't like it. It worked for me. Like on the projects I was working on, it was great. Like it worked for me. But a lot of people didn't like the first version. They liked the output because the output could go into Jira. So people always like the output. But in terms of the user interface, it was kind of like, we'll wait for the next one. And I think this new version that we just launched in January has really improved our framework and our architecture, and it's saved us cost-wise because the way that we had architected before, was not as cost-effective. Let's just say that. And so now it's more cost-effective and a lot more stepping you through the process instead of giving you all the information up front. So it was a lot of, involving folks and then also just kind of doing it from my experience. So it's a little bit of both.
But that sounds like the iterative development process, right? You put something out there, whether it was the MVP, you got feedback, you made adjustments, you presented something else that deviated from your original vision because you're getting feedback. And like you said, your brain processes very differently than probably the average person coming at software development. And so you could take for granted certain steps that they needed. They needed the wizard. You didn't need the wizard kind of thing, right?
Yes.
And so, but that's key is that you put it out there, you take your vision, you make adjustments, you put it out there again, you make more adjustments. And sometimes it takes 3 or 4 iterations before it's actually, monetizable. I mean, people could still use it, but, so we've got an idea here that now, do you kind of throw epics at it and so it kind of can get
so in Swiftly it estimates a lot. It estimates the number of epics, it creates the epics, it estimates the features, it creates the features, estimates the user stories, and it creates the user stories, and then it estimates the task. We also can create the task as well. And then we also create data elements. So the data elements that are going to be associated with user stories, we do a sketch of the wireframe for it. So it's like a templatized wireframe. It's not all that.
Sure. But it gets you in the ballpark, and then you give it to the UX designer and they
correct.
Yeah.
Exactly. And then it also does a roles matrix. It estimates the roles. It predicts the roles rather. And then some messaging. So like your systems messaging, like your validation messages for if some field isn't entered and all that other stuff. So it generates all of this information. And then you can say, yeah, that's right. No, that's not. Da, 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 da. So when we talk about empowered AI experts or AI empowered experts, right? That's what it is. It's using this tool so that you're empowered to be the professional that you need to be. Because that was a part of it. It's like I was spending so much time creating all this detail that I couldn't think about all the other things I need to think about to make the systems even better, right? Whether I worked as a product manager or if I worked as a systems analyst, a business, whatever, I didn't have the capacity to think about, okay, now once we're done with these features, how to make the system better, be a little bit more innovative. Now, this tool allows me to just do all the mundane tasks, like if I had a junior systems analyst, right? And it does that for me. So now I can think about, okay, what's the future of that platform or solution?
Yeah, and obviously software, the administrative subsystems, all the things that almost every software solution has, creating users, managing users, all that stuff.
Yep.
I mean, how much do those really change from system to system?
Exactly.
And that's the plate of the application, right?
Exactly. And what our system does is splits it up. Like what you're talking about is like the technical product roadmap versus the actual product roadmap. Because for every solution, if you're really going to go through this, you're going to need a product manager, right? Or, product owner. And then you're going to also need a technical product owner as well.
Absolutely.
Right? Or technical product manager. And so our solution, like, basically provide you with that. Like, what are the things that from a technical side? So if you're going to have integrations, if you have an integration with an LDAP, we generate all those requirements for you. So you can check the box. Yes, it does that. So if you're thinking about, independent verification and validation, it's easy. We generate all the things that you need to independently verify and validate. You just check that box and go, yes, yep, we got that in there. For like, if you're thinking about a solution that's off the shelf, boom, 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 boom. You just check everything that we have. But even if you're thinking about a custom solution, now you can develop your roadmap. Like, oh, these are the conversations I need to have with my product owner to make sure they understand that we need to create a contact, right? And how does create contact look? And what is that messaging for it, right? So it gives you this kind of like, oh, what are my questions? You don't have to sit and think about that anymore. It just generates it for you. Now you just check the boxes. You keep what you want, you take what you like, and leave the rest, basically. So it gives you that kind of well-versed depiction of what you need when you're developing a solution.
So, of course, Logic here, we're a testing company, and by 30 years, we've been doing testing for big companies, even in Silicon Valley. We've touched a lot of brands that you are very well known that come out of Silicon Valley. And name drop them here, their NDAs and all that. But
right.
The area you're talking about is very much affecting testing and test automation as well. So a lot of times we're taking now with AI, we're looking at the use case, the user stories and the validation in those, and generating the test scripts, at least the skeletons of what those test cases need to at least validate in the UI. As time progresses and things get better, the AI is going to be able to look at the user interface, whether it's a sketch or it's actually the screens, and start to build skeleton test scripts for that. And we're not there yet, but and we're partners at all the big boys. We know the timelines of when that stuff's going to arrive, which is a couple of years. But right now, the activity is around taking the user stories, which you generate, and build the test cases, not the test scripts, but the test cases. Tell me a little bit about the thinking you've had, and because I think I've looked at a couple of the videos and stuff around this, a little bit about how that then translates to the tail end, which people think about as testing. It shouldn't be. Testing should be there in the beginning with everything else. But Tell me a little bit about how you think about how this is going to affect the testing side of things at QA.
So when I started out at Accenture, I started out as a test engineer, basically. You know, everybody kind of rotates, but the intent was that once you have a requirement, the permutation of that requirement becomes your test case or test.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's it, right? So we create these user stories at its micro atomic level. You take that user story and you map it with another user story and another user story to chain it together so that you now have a combination for your test case, right? But then you can now permutate based off of that user story all the other different scenarios that would happen for that particular user story based off of all the other user stories you have. So that was always the intent. The intent of Swiftly is how do you take the continuity of the requirement from its inception, so from when the time it's born, all the way to the time it gets into operations, and then operations and maintenance. Because once it gets to operations and maintenance, now it's matured, right? That requirement has matured because it's already been developed and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
So then that then starts to execute into, now you have to evolve it yet again. If that particular requirement changes, then it becomes another iteration, and it should flow through the entire life cycle of the development so that you're able to continue to permutate that and make the different combinations based off of that particular requirement. So it's all like, at the end of the day, it's all about statistics and, you know, how to take one atomic thing and multiply it into, and chain it and multiply it into its other scenarios.
I'm excited to see the product. Yeah, I think it's an area that, you know, we're all very used to just jumping right in and building user stories and just hacking them together. And then it kind of has a feel like the system's matured, you know, as you're reading through them all and all the gaps are kind of filling in. But like you said, those are still epic-ish. You know, they don't get down to really, then you hand them over to the developer and it's like, okay, I guess I'm a designer now because I got to take this user story that doesn't really have a complete design. And you're expecting me as a developer to design against that user story. And there's still agile and the practices and methodologies coming through the days of physical creation, you know, in the defense industry. I've dealt with weapon systems and stuff that people die if you don't do things right, or people die.
Yeah.
And software just was so loose, you know, it was so uncomfortable to me, you know. It's like, wait a minute here, there's such a huge distance from what you have here to what you need to do, you know.
Right, which is the fear, right? Like my main thing is like, I will never accept a full-time job unless I can change just exactly what you said.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is, if we have doctors in place and they need to have a medical degree and they have to go through all this and they're getting reviewed by the boards and blah, blah, blah. We have buildings that are getting inspected and so on and so forth. Although software is intangible, it is actually tangible. Our data is very important to us, right? And as we can see every day, there's some type of data breach. And so if we don't start to really create those policies and frameworks and procedures, just like we do when we're building a brand new building and someone has to come in and inspect it and approve it, make sure the lights are working and, you know, all of the architecture and infrastructure is in place, we're going to have the same effects of if a building was not up to code in the software industry. So that is a very huge fear that
getting worse and worse. I mean, software is running cars, you know, so
correct.
With the autonomous vehicle stuff, it's just becoming more and more critical that these requirements are treated like a weapon system in the military.
Correct.
You know,
yes.
Yeah. All right. Well, you know, we're already at the top of the hour. Things go pretty quick. You know, we talked a little bit about how you pivoted in your working career into deciding, hey, I need to do something about this. What advice would you then have for other people that have ideas with SaaS solutions, software development? Obviously, you can get a lot further in software than you can, you know, deciding you want to have a new building or, you know, physical cutting metal and stuff like that, which I've been involved in both. And believe me, I'd much rather build software off my own pocketbook
Exactly.
than cutting metal, right? Um,
Right.
so tell me a little bit about what kind of the process you'd give some advice, and then we're going to probably have to wrap up here.
Yeah. So, what I would give advice for basically is one as an entrepreneur is to find that niche, right? Find your sweet spot, find what you're good at. Because constantly the universe is telling you what you're good at, and sometimes you're just not paying attention to it, right? So, find that and really hone in on your skill sets, but then also if you're not looking at the entrepreneur route, if you are just a systems engineer, or not just, I won't say that, if you are a systems engineer or a systems analyst, definitely help the development team and the testing team because it's your job, right? Like it's your job because that quality starts there. Once those requirements are as detailed as possible, the likelihood of the system and the scope or the solution not being able to be delivered on time lessens, right? So making sure that you're able to negotiate what does not need to be developed by day one, because that's a lot of it. Like everybody thinks they want to throw the whole kitchen sink, and sometimes you don't need the little faucet on the side when you're building the kitchen, right? You just need the regular faucet. You don't need a hot water tap, right? So being able to negotiate those features and understanding how to do that is very, very important as a systems analyst or a systems engineer. And taking it from there, being able to know how to negotiate, being able to know how to define and manage scope and controlling it.
Thank you so much for that advice for everybody.
Yes.
All right, before we wrap up, I just wanted to just introduce our next week's show. It's Philip Eric. I think I pronounced it right. And he is developer relationships at replay.io. And the topic's going to be about how to write a flaky test. And this is really about narrowing down bugs and to demonstrate how to use a time machine debugger to identify the root cause. Very interesting. So again, root cause analysis against your bugs is critical. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. So thanks again so much for Melissa for your time. And, I look forward to playing with your tool. That's for sure. Maybe putting it to work.
Yes, sure. Thank you.
All right.
Thanks for having me.
Have a great rest of your week. And until next week, everybody,